Hello, my name is Jasper Collier, and this is the 2019 DC Oral History Collaborative Partnership Grants Workshop. The DC Oral History Collaborative is a partnership of Humanities DC, the Historical Society of Washington, DC, and the DC Public Library. We'll start with a definition of what oral history is for the DC Oral History Collaborative. It's important to make this distinction because we're not looking for oral histories that might have been done for journalistic purposes or for a documentary film. What we're looking for are complete, unedited life histories, in-depth accounts that give narrators the chance to reflect and tell their stories and make sure that they can put their full narratives on the recording as much as they would like to do. So oral histories for the DC Oral History Collaborative usually can last between an hour and a half and 2 hours long. We're looking for the full unedited recordings as part of the final product. Here's some basic information about the grants that we have available this year. The grants for the new oral history projects, the maximum award is $6,000. This is for the recording of new oral histories and all expenses associated with that. That can include paying people who are working on the project. In some cases, it can pay for stipends for narrators. It can purchase equipment, and it can also pay for some of the follow-up activities like transcription. Projects should have a theme, focus, or research question. All grants must interview a minimum of 5 people. And the final product for each project will be a set of recordings, the full unedited recordings that can be audio or video, accompanied by transcripts, legal release forms, metadata worksheets, timestamp indexes, and photographs of interviewees when possible. We're also offering for 2019 grants for public projects and events. The maximum award for those is up to $8,000, and those are for projects that use existing oral history collections to create public humanities projects for Washington residents. All of the grants for the public projects and events must present a final tangible product that can be preservable in the DC Digital Museum, an online repository at the end of the grant period. If you'd like to begin your application, you go to grantapplication.wdchumanities.org, as you can see down here at the bottom of the screen. All proposals are due on Friday, January 25th, 2019 by the end of the day, so that is by midnight. Here are just a few ways the DC Oral History Collaborative is a unique opportunity compared to some other grant opportunities you might have applied for in the past. We like to think of it more as a partnership than a grant. In a lot of ways that we kind of identify this as a partnership. Project directors not only get grant funding, but they also get capacity building support. Project directors are actually required to attend a 3-session oral history workshop that will be held in March this year. Attendance at that workshop is required only for new oral history project grantees, not for the public programs and events grant. The grant also requires scheduled check-ins with DC OHC support consultants. It requires the interviews be submitted for possible inclusion in the DC Public Library special collections, provides opportunities for cohort members to share work experiences and best practices through progress updates and networking events. And the expectation is that partners will also work with the Oral History Collaborative to promote the collaborative overall and to promote the activities that they themselves are working on. A couple other ways it's different than typical Humanities DC grants. Usually, Humanities DC grants are only open to 501c3 nonprofit organizations. But the DC Oral History grants are actually open to individuals as well. Unlike other Humanities DC grants, the DC Oral History Collaborative grants can be accepted by organizations that already have other open Humanities DC grants at the same time, provided those grants aren't delinquent. The DC Oral History Collaborative grant also does not require the humanities scholar to be identified as a separate role in the proposal. This is because each grantee will work with a consulting oral historian who's on the staff of the DC Oral History Collaborative throughout the process. Just a few other additional requirements for the new projects grant. Again, The project directors must be able to attend a 3-session workshop totaling 9 hours, and that will take place in March on the 12th to 19th and the 26th from 6 to 9 p.m. Again, that's a total of 9 hours, and that's 3 successive Tuesdays in March immediately at the beginning of the grant period. Again, projects should have a theme, focus, or research question they aim to illuminate. It's one of the questions on the application. All projects must interview a minimum of 5 people. Projects must work to engage their narrators' communities in the overall design and implementation of the project. Again, that's a question on the application. And finally, the final product for each grant will be a set of well-documented recordings accompanied by transcripts, legal release forms, metadata worksheets, timestamp indexes, and photographs of interviewees. All those things are required by the DC Public Library for the inclusion of the interviews in their special collections. Some sample project types for the New World History Project. Some of the topics that might be covered include institutions. They might be neighborhood studies. They might involve groups of people who were present during a particular time period or historic event. It might be labor histories that are focused around a particular industry field or type of work. Ideas for the Public Projects Grant. Grantees might choose to create listening stations. They might do public exhibits, they might do panel discussions, they might do listening sessions or screenings of oral histories, films, podcasts. One of the things that we're very interested in seeing if people are able to do is creation of lesson plans and curricula for K through 12 students using oral histories. In each case, in the application, we will ask which oral histories will be used to create the public projects, and what the topics and themes of those oral histories are. And now we'll move to the section that shows how to access the online portal and how to begin your application. Again, you go to grantapplication.wdchumanities.org to access the portal. The first screen you'll see is the logon page. If your organization has already applied for a Humanities DC grant in the past and not create a new account, please use the account information that your organization has used in the past. Note that some of the information on the screen might not be relevant to the DC Oral History Collaborative Grant. One of the things that it indicates on the screen is the organization has to be a 501c3 nonprofit. As we just discussed, for the DC Oral History Collaborative Grant, you may also apply as an individual. When you're ready to create a new account, click the button. And the next screen you'll see is asking for information about your sponsoring organization. If you're applying as an individual, your information, your personal information can be filled in here as the information for the sponsoring organization. The one catch is that it asks for an EIN or tax identification number, which you're likely not to have if you're applying as an individual. In that case, as a placeholder and a workaround, enter all ones in this space because you are required to enter information into the tax ID field in order to proceed with the application. If you're applying as an organization, please fill it out like normal and include your EIN or tax identification number. We'll next take you to a page where you can provide information about the project director. If the information for the director is the same as the address from the organization, you can click the button at the top to copy the information into the fields. We'll also ask if you're the executive officer for the organization. If you're not the executive officer, it'll ask you to input information about the executive officer for your organization. Finally, it'll ask you to create a password, and once you've done so, click Create Account, and we'll take you to your applicant dashboard. To begin your application, click Apply at the top of the screen. And you'll see the 2 opportunities for the DC Oral History Collaborative that are open for 2019. You can select here between the Public Projects or Events Grant or the New Oral History Projects Grant. And we'll begin by looking at the New Oral History Projects Grant. Note that in the description you can click and download the full RFP before you begin the application so you can review the guidelines and requirements of the grant. The first thing that it'll ask for is some basic information, the name of your project, whether or not it's new or ongoing. The New Oral History Projects Grant will fund projects that are ongoing as long as it's funding the creation of new oral history interviews as part of that project. Input the amount requested. Remember, the maximum is $6,000, and click all awards or jurisdictions in which your project will take place. The first question of the project narrative asks about your area of interest or research topic. Please be as descriptive as possible and make sure to explain why oral history is the best tool for this particular inquiry. It next asks for the total estimated interviews. Remember that the minimum is 5 interviews for the project. And then an idea of your project timeline, keeping in mind that for the first 3 weeks of the grant period, the project directors will attend those required workshops. Then it will ask for the contribution to Washington, D.C. history. This is a great spot to input information about how your particular oral history project adds to the narrative Washington, D.C. history. Does it fill in a gap that's missing? Does it tell an untold story? And then we also ask you to try to predict how your interviews will be used by the public after they're in the archives. Project collaboration. This question asks for you to describe your team member and the roles each person will play, and also asks you to identify any partners that you expect to have working on the project, partner organizations that is you would have working on the project, and how they'll contribute. The next question is about community engagement. As we mentioned before, the project does require that you make some effort to engage the community from which you're learning. So the effort here is to make sure that you are actively engaging the community in the development of the project, the carrying out of the project, and not just the interviewing for the project. The real final question of the narrative asks about cohort engagement, and this question asks how you will contribute to the rest of the 2019 DC Oral History Collaborative grantees as part of these ongoing sessions and activities and efforts to engage the group of grantees, and what you would expect to get out of that experience as well. There is one final question. We ask for you to identify your familiarity with oral history best practices. This does not mean that you have to be familiar with oral history best practices to qualify for the grant. In fact, in some cases, people might have no familiarity or very little familiarity with the best practices, and that's actually why we have the workshops at the beginning, is to make sure everybody starts from the same baseline. We just ask the question to make sure the trainers know where everybody's coming from when they put the workshops together. Then we ask you to input the project director information on the application. We got it before as part of your registration for the portal, but we also want the project director information to be on the application as well. There are 3 spaces where you can upload supporting documents. One of the great things to upload here would be if you've identified a partner organization, a letter of support indicating how they'll participate and to demonstrate that they are actively engaged in the project. Any letters of support that you can provide from other relevant institutions, individuals who might be working with the project, examples of past work, anything like that can be uploaded here to these appendix spots. The final thing that you'll have to fill out is the budget and the budget narrative. To do that, you click on this link where it says click here to download budget sheet, and it will create a template for you which you download, you fill out, and then you upload here. Please use the categories and the columns on the template, and some of the expenses that you might have on there would include honoraria for your grantees, salary and wages for you and the people working on your project, the cost of equipment, purchasing audio recorders, cameras, and then of course you'd want to account for the potential costs associated with transcribing your interviews as well. In the narrative portion, that's where you take the categories in the budget sheet, you break them down, you say exactly how the funding will be spent within each category. So as you can see in this example, $710 is identified on the budget sheet, the honoraria category. The budget narrative explains how that $710 will be spent, who will get the funding. And the last thing you do is review the preliminary conditions and sign the and put your e-signature at the end of the application. You can save your work at any time and come back to it with the button on the left, and when you're ready to submit, you click the button on the right. One thing that is helpful for some people, after you've submitted or if you've put information into the grant application, you've clicked the Save button, you'll have the option of clicking the Application Packet button to download a PDF of what you filled out for you to do your revisions and your edits on paper instead of on the computer screen. All right, and then most of the questions are the same on the Public Projects Grant application, except for 4 questions in the narrative. We'll go over those 4 questions very quickly. The first question in the narrative for the Public Projects Grant asks which oral histories you'll be using, some background information on those, what was their central theme and focus, what time period were they collected, and in what repository, if any, can they be found. We also ask you to indicate how many of those interviews you'll be using, how many different oral history narrators' voices will be heard in your project. And then we ask you to describe in as much detail as you can what your project will look like. How will users, audience members, participants engage with, interact with the project, and how will those oral history recordings be incorporated? 2 more questions. We ask again for narrator engagement. This can be a little bit more difficult for the public projects. If it is at all possible to engage communities with the narratives that you're working with, then we ask how you'll do that. In some cases for the public projects, especially if you're using oral histories that are older, it might not be possible to engage the community in that way. If that is the case, what we ask for in this question is for you to describe how you'll ensure that the voices, the original voices from those oral histories come through in the public project that you're going to present. The final question is about the record of your program for education and research. One of the requirements of the Public Projects and Programs Grant is that you'll provide some sort of tangible record that can be added to the DC Digital Museum, which is Humanities DC's online archive of interpretive materials. In some cases, your final product will be that record for education and research. For example, if you're proposing a lesson plan or curricula, you would submit that lesson plan or curricula as the record of your program. If you are creating an original published work, then that would be the record of your program. But there are also some cases, especially with public events, where that record of your program might not be immediately apparent. So what we want you to do is describe here, especially if you're doing a screening or a panel presentation, what will remain of that panel, screening, public presentation that can be added to the DC Digital Museum record. And that's it for the application. Just want to talk about a few other ways that you can become involved with the DC Oral History Collaborative. There's 2 other main activities of the DC OHC. One way is that you can register to become a volunteer interviewer. We have volunteer interview workshops periodically throughout the year. The 2019 workshops have not yet been scheduled, but if you keep in touch with DC OHC, hopefully you'll be able to see those workshops as soon as they come out. They are free, but they're also limited space and first come, first serve. So you do want to keep up with us to make sure you have the chance to register for those when they do come out. The second thing is that the DC Oral History Collaborative is actively searching out oral histories that are related to Washington, D.C., so that we can do a survey of those and try to make them more accessible to the general public. We want to identify collections that are not only in the Library of Congress or the National Archives, the DC Public Library, and the Historical Society. We're looking for collections that are in small archives, personal repositories, people's houses, churches, civic associations, community organizations, anywhere oral histories about DC might exist. We're hoping to find out about those and document those in a very public way. So if you have any tips about where some oral history collections might exist in Washington, D.C., please email us at the email addresses on the screen. And that is it for the workshop. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at the information on the screen. Make sure to follow the DC Oral History Collaborative on Twitter and Facebook. and visit us on our website at dcoralhistories.org. Thank you, and have a good day.